Okay, hi everyone. It's 1 p.m. Eastern by my clock, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining me today. It's really a pleasure to have you. I know a lot of us are stuck working from home because of the current global situation, so this just seemed like a great opportunity for us to brush up on our software skills. So during the course of the webinar, I'd highly encourage you to enter in any questions you have into the questions and answer box, and that's pictured on the right-hand side of my screen, the lower right corner. Let me move it around so you'll know what I'm talking about. It might look a little different on your operating system, but it should be a little box that says enter a question for staff. And so if you have a question about what we're talking about, you can enter it in, and either my colleague Raphael, who's on the line, will answer you via the chat window, or I'll try to work my answer into the course of the webinar. And if your question's more in depth, then we will follow up with you via email, because we have all of your emails from your webinar registrations. Okay, so hopefully what I'd like to do is give you all an overview of how to use the software efficiently. So if you have a experiment with 10, 20, or 100 or 200 files, you don't want to spend necessarily hours and hours analyzing that, right? So I'm going to show you a more efficient workflow that applies to a wide variety of experiments that you could possibly be doing. So here's our outline for today. We have three major points we want to cover. So the first thing we want to do is we want to learn how to add the basic elements to our FCS Express layout. And that includes the plots, the gates, and the statistics, right? So we're going to show you how to add those in. There's usually a few ways to do those things. I'll try to point out a few ways so that you can pick the way that feels most intuitive to you. Then we're also going to learn how to run a batch process. And this ties into what I was saying before. So, let's say you had 20 data files, rather than creating 20 different, rather than creating a full complement of plots for all the 20 files, you can just create one complement of plots and then iterate all your samples through that in a batch process. And then you'll get those summarized with a single click into PowerPoint, PDF, and Excel formats. And so that's going to be a time saver. I think over the course of a year of running flow cytometry experiments, I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that you'll save at least a couple of weeks of work hours doing that. So, tens and tens of hours, depending on how much flow analysis you're actually doing. And the last thing I want to cover is how to reuse your layout as a template. So that is going to be, once you've spent some time, whether it's 15 minutes or an hour or whatever it is, creating your layout, most of the time you have to repeat the experiment 2 or 3 times before you believe the result and before you can even think of submitting it for publication. So, our philosophy is, why recreate the wheel? Why create the same layout over and over again when you're running a similar experiment? So I'm going to show you how easy it is to just reuse the layout you already created as a template for future experiments that are similar. Okay, so again, if you have any questions, please answer them in. I'm keeping my eye on the questions and answer box, and I'll try to answer them. And if I can't answer them or they're off topic, we will address those via the chat window and possibly by email if it's more in depth. Okay, so thanks so much again for joining us. So let's actually get started in earnest. And I also wanted to add that this webinar will be recorded and will be archived online. So don't feel like you need to take a lot of notes. Just sit back, try to get an overall idea of what we're trying to present here, because you can refer to the recording later, okay? So when you launch FCS Express, you are going to get this startup screen, unless you've disabled it. And you can open up a new layout from this upper right square here that says New Layout. If you don't have the startup screen, just go to the File tab and go to File New. Okay, so it's a lot like Microsoft Office. We modeled our software interface on Microsoft Office so it would feel intuitive to most of you, because I think most of us spend hours and hours in Outlook and Word and PowerPoint, right? Okay, so here's our new layout. So how would you put in a plot in FCS Express? So there's a couple different ways to do it. I'm going to show you the way that's basically the method that we show everyone when they're starting out. So you know how if you're in PowerPoint, you would go to the Insert tab to put in a picture. So in FCS Express, you'll go to the Insert tab, and then you'll choose what plot type you want to put in. So let's put in a color dot plot. So you can just choose that and click once on your layout, and then the software will ask you to navigate to the data file that you want to put in. So let's put that one in. Okay, and let me zoom in so you can see some of the text here on the axes. So we'll change these axes to something of interest. Okay, and then once you have a plot in, you can do a lot of things with this plot. So the next thing you might want to do is put in a gate. So all the gating tools are here on the gating tab, right? That makes sense. So you have all the different kinds of gates you'd want: ellipse, rectangle, polygon, freeform. Let's do a polygon. I'm going to click once on each vertex. And you can click on the original vertex or press the space bar to close. Give your gate a name. You can change the color if you want. Okay, and so now we want to drill down on that limbs population. Okay, we're just doing a real simple workflow today. So how would we do that? Well, you can put your cursor inside the limbs and just drag and drop the gate from the middle of the gate to an empty spot in your layout. And now you have a plot that's gated on limbs. Okay, also, just like PowerPoint, we have these align tools. So if you want to align these so that they're the top edges are aligned, you can come to the Home Align button just like you would in PowerPoint and do an align top. Okay. Let me show you also, once you've added in your first file to the layout, then you have all of the files added to your data list automatically. So here on the data tab, we have this data list. And so these are all the files. So you can actually use the data list as a source to drag and drop files to the layout. So if I want to now put in a third plot from this file, I can just grab that file name from the data list, drag and drop it in to the layout, and then the software asks us what we want to put in. Okay, so maybe I want to put in a histogram. Okay, so we'll come back to that histogram later. Let's not format that right now. But maybe what I'll do is I'll just change it to a different parameter. Okay, so if you want to work with the data list right off the bat rather than using the Insert tab, you certainly can. You can just open up the data list in a new layout and it'll be empty. And then you can drag your files from your Mac Finder or your Windows Explorer folder directly into the data list. Or you can use this little blue plus and say add data file. Okay, it's the same thing. So like I said, there's 2 or 3 different ways to do things in FCS Express. Okay, so let's get back into our workflow. So on this plot on the upper right, I have my limbs population. You can see that my plot title is telling me it's gated on limbs. So let's change this to a couple of other parameters we might be interested in looking at, maybe CD3, CD19. Okay, and let's make a couple more gates. So these are our T cells. Here's our B cells. Okay, and so you can continue to make more and more gates. One thing I want to point out is we're working with colored dot plots right now, and so that allows us to see the back gating, right? So if I move around this T cells gate on the plot at right, do you see that on the plot at left, the red color is updating in the plot, right? So color dot plots are a great way to just automatically see backgating in your samples. Okay, so there's no special backgating tool required. It's just built into your layout. If you don't need that necessarily, or you want to look at a different plot type, you certainly can. You can just change the plot type to a different plot type. So if you select you know, 1 or 2 plots or however many plots you want, just go to change plot type and click on density. Okay, so now these are all density plots. You can change it to contour, and there's a whole lot of other formatting choices as well. So if you want to still use contour, but you want to get rid of the color, let's say you need everything to be black and white because you need it to be that way for publication, you can click on color levels over here and then change this to, for instance, black. Okay, then everything is black. Okay. And I do see some questions about formatting. I will get to that in a minute. So let's just undo that and get back to some color dot plots. Okay. So how do we apply gates? Okay, so that's going to tie into some other things I want to show you. So once you have a few gates in your layout, you can see an interactive list of your gates here in the gate view. And that's from the Insert tab. And here you can change the hierarchy of your gates as well. So let's say that I want my red T-cells gate to no longer be a child of lymphs. I can just drag this T-cells gate out beyond the first node. And now you see, if I maximize this plot on the left, we have the red T-cell gates, the red T-cell events scattered throughout the plot. They're no longer restricted to the lymphs. And that's, you know, another example of the utility of color dot plots, right? So let's put that back in. You can also change the name of the gates here. So if you double click on the square, and let's say I want this to be called, you know, T-cell lymphs or something like that, you can change that and that will automatically update on your gate text boxes as well, okay? And then you can use this gate view as a way to regate your plots. So this histogram right now is not gated on anything. And if I want to gate this on, for instance, lymphs, I can just grab my lymphs gate from the gate view and drag and drop it onto this plot. And now it's gated on lymphs, okay? You can also do that from plot to plot. So let's say I want to gate this plot down here on T-cell, the red T-cell gate. I can grab the T-cell gate, drag and drop it onto the histogram. Whoops, sorry, it's a little bit tricky with my trackpad sometimes. There, now it's gated on T-cell lymphs, right? And a third way to apply gates is you can, for instance, select multiple plots if you want to. I just did a command click to select multiple plots on a Mac. If you're on a PC, you would do a control click. Come up to the gating tab and use this current gate drop-down menu. And here I can gate both of these plots simultaneously on lymphs, okay? Okay, so I see some of the questions are being answered by Raphael in the chat window. Okay, so let's talk, before we go more in depth into gates, because there's a whole lot of things you can do with gates. I do see that a lot of folks have questions about formatting, and I touched on that already when I talked about just reformatting a plot from color dot into density or contour. There's a whole lot of things you can do with formatting. So if you want to do it to a single plot, you can just double click on the plot, and then you'll get your formatting window opening up. You can dock this on the left or the right so it doesn't cover up your layout. Okay, and so here you can change a whole lot of things. So if I want to change the font of my title, just go to title here in the drop-down menu, and I can increase the size of the font to 10, for example, and maybe change the color to, you'd probably want to change it to black. I'm just going to change it to red so that it's really obvious, okay? You can get rid of that border around the title. So anything you want to do to the titles, you can do that there. If you want to change, let's say, the axes, that's here. So we are going to default to by exponential for most types of FCS file data for the fluorescence parameters. We have some instrument-specific settings that will default to other scaling types if you're using a less common instrument. But if you want to force the change to some other type of scaling like linear, log, hyperlog, etc., even ArcSine-H, all of that is there. You can do that separately for the X and the Y axis. You know, if you needed to change the range, you could do all that, change the font of the axis. So all that is here in the formatting menu, which I just got to by double clicking on the plot. Okay, so, and if you wanted to, by the way, if you wanted to do it to 2 plots at the same time, you can just select both of those plots and then use those buttons up here on the formatting menu. So here's your formatting axis button. Hopefully you can see me highlighting it with my mouse. Here's the title. All of those are the same commands and they would just apply simultaneously to 2 plots. Okay. One other thing I wanted to show you about gates, just to before we move on to the next section, is you can also use the replace a gate feature. So like, let's say if you don't want this B cell gate here to be an ellipse anymore, you want it to be a freeform, you can just start drawing your gate. Freeform is sort of like a pencil tool, and then say replace, and then choose the gate you want to replace. So we want to replace the B cells gate. Okay, so there's no need to start over, you know, with deleting gates and redrawing them. You can just use that nice replace a gate feature and your gate will remain in the same place in the hierarchy that it was before. Okay, so are there any questions about gates? Alrighty, great. So let me hop back over to our webinar outline slide, just so we stay on track here. So we've talked about adding plots. We've talked about creating gates and applying gates to plots, reformatting gate names and colors and things like that. So let's talk about the last basic element that you would probably want to be adding to your layout before you move on to the next steps, and that's just adding some basic statistics. Okay. And you know, I always like to do a quick save, just so I know where my file is if I need to get back to it. Okay, so let's add some statistics. Now you can see we already have some basic statistics showing up on the plots. We have that in the form of the gate percentage, right? For every plot, for every gate that's drawn on the plot. Well, you can get more statistics at a glance simply by right-clicking on the plot and going to Statistics, Gate Statistics from the pop-up menu. If you had quadrants, which are available from the gating tab as well, you could get quadrant statistics. I have that grayed out because I don't have quadrants showing on my plot. So let's put in some gate statistics. And this window is also formatable. So if you right click on it, you can take away or add in different columns. So we don't need this overlay column. Let's say I'm not interested in the X geometric mean, but I am interested in the X median. Okay, and then there's a whole lot of other statistics too. So if you're using a BD cytometer and you want % gated parent, % gated grandparent, or BD, robust SD, robust CV. Those are all stats that you might be used to seeing from your Diva software, for example. So we've put those in at the request of our customers and they're all available to you there. So another important thing to keep in mind with these statistics, default statistics text boxes, is that they're based on the plot that they originated from. So remember, I'd right-clicked on this upper right plot in order to get that statistics window. And you can also double check where a statistics window comes from by mousing over it when it's not selected. And you see that that beige hover text or manila colored hover text there, it says gate statistics window for plot number 2. So you can tell for sure that it's coming from this plot. This is plot number 2, the upper right plot. So the important thing to keep in mind is, since the statistics are plot based, this column right here, % of gated cells, is using the gate of the plot as the denominator. So basically, for example, this stat right here, B cells. We have 7.02. It's taking the number of events in the B cells gate and dividing it by the number of events of the lymphs gate, because this plot's gated on lymphs, and then multiplying it by 100, of course, to get the percentage, okay? So that's all plot-based. If you wanted to look at the percent of cells of the entire FCS file, you would look at this column here, percent of all cells. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Again, if you guys have any questions when you are working with your data on your own, you can email us at support@denovosoftware.com, and we can even do a screen share with you individually to help out. Okay, and the reason I'm mentioning that is I see so many questions in the questions and answer box, and some of them are not necessarily what we're talking about right now, so I don't want to get derailed from the workflow, but we will be answering them, you know, either in the chat window or online later. And some of these questions are more in depth, and they're the types of things that, you know, if you write to us at support, we'll be able to help you on a more individualized basis. Okay, so just wanted you to know I'm not ignoring you. Okay, so right, so those are the statistics. And then, you know, you can even grab these statistics and have them display on the plot. So let's say, you know, inside of this T-cell lymphs text box, you also want to put the number of events. Just grab the number of events from there and drag it into the text box there. Actually, it has formed its own text box, but that's okay. And then you can put in some free text if you want to. Okay, and of course these are going to be dynamic. So when you move around the gate, it's going to update in real time, okay? Even if you move around the parent gate, so this plot's gated on lymphs. Even if I move around my lymphs gate, you see everything is updating seamlessly. All the plots, all the gates. So that live updating should be working pretty well for you in FCS Express, okay? So that's how to add some basic statistics. You know, before we go on to the batch process, I want to come back into the formatting menu because I saw one person had a question about how to add an overlay to the histogram. So let's do that. You know, it's something that I'll probably cover in more depth when we do a batch processing webinar, which I believe is the following week. And that should be interesting because I'll talk about more complex logic to the batch. Right now, we're just going to batch through one file at a time. But we can add, why don't we pretend that we have a control histogram that we want to add to this histogram, and then we'll format them so the histogram looks really nicely, and then we'll have a really nice batch process to run, okay? So I'm going to grab, let's pretend that this third file is some sort of control, okay? I'm going to grab my third file here and just drag and drop it onto that histogram. Then the software asks me, do you want to replace that existing overlay on the plot or add it as a new overlay? So let's do the latter. We're going to add it. So we'll have a total of 2 overlays on the plot. Okay, so now you see we have the 2 overlays. And this histogram is not smoothed. That's why the data looks rather ragged. But I'm going to show you how to add the smoothing right now into the plot. So again, you know, let's just close the data list. We don't really need that right now. Let's double click on the plot and get our formatting window to open up. So we'll come over here to overlays, and so this is the second overlay. Let's pretend that's our control. And you know what, actually let's first apply some smoothing to both overlays. So I'm going to select both overlays and maybe apply a smoothing of 10. You see right away the data is a little bit easier to see, especially when it's overlaid like that. And maybe I even want to add some fills to the histogram. If you have overlapping populations, especially if you start to get more and more overlays, it's hard to see what's going on with each overlay. So you can increase your transparency so you can see through them. So I'll put like a transparency of 35, for example. See, that looks nice. I can start to see it a little bit better. And maybe I'll even change the color of the second overlay, which is my control. Maybe I'll change it to this nice blue-gray color. Okay, and then, you know, I can change my first overlay to, you know, some other color, just to make things look however you want it to look. Then you can come over here and put in a legend as well. So I'm going to go to legend and click visible, and now the legend comes over on the right, you can just, if you find that it's smushing your plot, you can just expand the width of the plot like that, or you can put the legend somewhere else, like on the bottom. So there's a whole lot of different formatting options. Another thing you might want to pay attention to, when you're doing histograms, is you can apply normalization. So that's here in the formatting menu under specific options. So we're not normalizing it by default, but you can put in, for example, normalizing the peak value, and that makes both histograms look like they have the same peak height, or you can normalize it to number of events, which essentially equalizes the area under the curve. So don't be afraid to use normalization because it's not going to affect your statistics in any way. It's simply a visualization aid. And all these things I'm showing you, like the smoothing, the colors, the normalizations, those are all things you can set up in your default user options as well. So that way you won't have to do it one by one, or every time you design a new layout. You can just by default have a smoothing applied and legends and all that. Okay, so I'm not going to show you like step by step how to do that, but I'll just get you to the right spot. So if you do want to set up those normalization options, if you go to File tab, Options, you can set up your default user options here under 1D plots. Sorry, no, it's under histogram. So under histogram specific options, this is where you can set up what kind of normalization you want by default. Under overlays here, you could select all these overlays and put in whatever smoothing you wanted to do by default, and then that would take effect on future layouts. Okay, it doesn't retroactively apply to an existing layout. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to everybody. One other thing I wanted to mention is we're going to do a batch process, right? That's the next step. But before we do that, we need to anchor this control overlay so that it doesn't participate in the batch, i.e. This second overlay that we added, we're pretending or treating it as a sort of control. We want it to be a reference overlay that is stationary as we batch through all of our other samples when we're doing the batch process. So we're going to highlight that second overlay and uncheck this box right here that says change data file during next previous batch. So that will allow us to fly through all our samples, generate the exports to PowerPoint, PDF, etc., while keeping that second overlay stationary in the plot as a reference. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Okay. I do see a question about changing the names of the samples in the legend. That is one thing I can show you how to do since I'm actually on that screen right now. So, you can select the second overlay here and say that you want this to be your control. And so now you see that the legend text here in the histogram says control for the gray overlay. And then, if you wanted to, you could even change the legend text to any number of things. So like if you had two overlays that were gated differently, like maybe an overlay between your T cells and your B cells, you could change this to say the gate of the sample rather than the sample file name. If you had different keywords that you entered in at the time of acquisition of your files. So like, let's say your file name was way too long. You didn't want that to be in your legend. You just wanted something shorter, like a sample ID or a tube name. You could get to that by using the keyword function, okay? And then there's these other options too, which I'll talk about more in the batch processing specific webinar next week, because that's when we're going to talk about more complex examples with different logic and using panels and such. Okay, so I'll talk about those then. So definitely tune in, if you're interested in getting the most out of batch processing. Okay, so all right, so let's hop back to our webinar outline for a second. So we've added all the basic elements to our layout. And now we're going to run a batch process. And the objective here is to summarize the results from the entire list of files we had. Remember, I opened up the data list. We had 9 or 10 files. We want to summarize all those results to a visual format like PowerPoint and also to Excel. Okay, so let's do that. That's going to be very easy to do. But before you run a batch, I would say it's always a good idea to preview your samples. So, like I mentioned, this layout does have 9 files in it. And so before we run the batch, let's just take a quick preview of how these samples look for all of the, or how the plots look for all of the samples rather. And if you click next and previous here on the data tabs, you always want to do these buttons. Let me circle this. This is kind of important. So, oh, I'm sorry, my drawing tools are not working. They frequently just stop working on Mac. But basically, when you're previewing all your samples, you want to use these blue double arrows, okay? Don't use these single arrows. That's more for layout building. But when you're previewing samples, use the double arrows. That will change the data files on all of the plots simultaneously, okay? So if I go next, and you see that the active file is being highlighted in turquoise on the data list here on the right as well, right? Okay. So now I'm on file 6, file 7, file 8. Okay. Right. And then if you want to jump to non-consecutive iterations, you can use this little iteration dropdown, or you can use just single click on these blue numbers in the iteration column in the data list. That'll get you there as well. Okay, so I'm previewing all my samples. I think it looks pretty good. I'm just going to run a batch process just as is, okay? So let's talk about how to set up this batch process together. Okay, so I'm gonna come to the batch tab. All the batch tools are here on the batch tab, right? That makes sense. We'll put in our batch actions. And then this is a window that you can dock on the left or right. So I like to mention this because a lot of you, since you're working from home, especially, you're probably working off of small laptops. You might not have a secondary monitor. And so you find that this is covering up your layout, and it's kind of difficult to work with, right? So FCS Express has these tools where you can dock your dockable windows so that they don't cover your layout. So as you drag the dockable window, I'm just grabbing it from the top of it and keeping my mouse button pressed and dragging it to the center of the screen. And then you have this icon with 4 arrows in the middle of your screen, and I'm mousing over the left side of that icon, and then I let go of my mouse button. And so now we have the batch process actions docked on the left, so they're no longer covering the plot. I'm going to grab this data list and do the same thing so that it's out of the way. So I'm going to actually dock this one inside the batch actions, just like that. Okay, and now you see I have a lot more room to see my layout while still having these necessary windows open. Okay, so let's put in a couple of different batch actions. And I do see a question about how to fit the gates for a particular sample. I'll show you where that is when we run the batch. There is a way to handle that in the batch so you can have a particular gating position for every sample. So let's just set it up first, and then I'll show you where that is. Okay, so quick note, if you just want to print out for your lab notebook, you can just click print here. And as long as you are connected or networked to a printer, that'll just print out. So you don't even have to make a PDF if that's all you need. But I'm going to uncheck that because I don't really want to print to my printer. I just want you to know it's there. Let's do a save to PowerPoint. Okay. And I'll check this off so it opens automatically. And I know this is a large window. All you need to do is scroll down to the bottom and click on this little yellow folder. And now we'll give this a name and say OK. And I'll show you the PDF as well. I'm not going to run the PDF though, because we don't really need it. But if you do want to run the PDF, just make sure that when you open it, you select this second option here, combine the output from all iterations into a single file. If you leave it on this, FCS Express will try to create a separate PDF for every file, which is usually not what people want. So just click that second option, okay? I'm going to cancel that because just in the interest of time, we're just going to do a PowerPoint and an Excel only. PowerPoint is nice because you get these images that are spilling off of the side of the page, whereas PDF, it really does print the white page as you see it, so you would have these objects cut off, unless you, of course, move them over to be within the borders of the page. Okay, so let's put in our Excel. So there's 2 different Excel choices, the export to Excel column mode and then cell mode. You want to do the first one, column mode. Cell mode is more for regulated environments and stuff. Okay, so let's again click on this yellow folder and save this on our desktop. So we're almost ready to run the batch. We just need to tell FCS Express which statistics we want to export to the Excel, right? Because if you take a look at the default statistics, we have, you know, this is like 12 or 20 basic statistics, and we have 3 gates. And so that would be 36 columns in your Excel. And this is a very simple layout, right? Probably a lot of you have way more gates than I'm showing you today. So we don't export all the stats from all the gates by default, because then you'll end up with an unwieldy spreadsheet with a lot of statistics you're probably not even interested in, right? And it's going to be hard to make sense of. So now's the time to decide which stats you really want to see in the spreadsheet. So that works by drag and drop, just like everything else in FCS Express. So if you're interested in, for example, a statistic from this blue LIMS gate, you can grab the LIMS gate here and the word Excel, okay? And then the software knows you want a stat based off of LIMS. So LIMS is selected in the gate thing here. And then you can select, you know, maybe I want to look at number of events. You can multiple select items like number of events, percent of gated cells, maybe Y median. I'm doing a command click to select multiple items. If you're on a PC, you would do a control click, okay? And maybe I'll select file name also. That way the file name will be the first column in the Excel. So, because we're going to batch through 9 different files. So of course we want the file name to show up. So those all came through. You can also use this statistics window as a source to drag and drop from. So like maybe if you want to have this LIMS X median, you can drag that over. Maybe if you want all of these B cell stats, I'm just going to do a shift click there to select that entire row and drag that in. Okay, so let's run this batch. It's going to be very, very fast, and I'm just going to show you it first with the same gating position for all the samples. Then I'll come back in and I will show you how you can adjust the gating position for every sample, okay? But I just want to show you the simplest case first so you see how easy it is. So when you're ready to go, you want to make sure that you're starting with the first sample showing in your layout, because if I started with the 5th sample, for example, I would only get sample 5 to the end of the data list in my PowerPoint and my Excel. So just start with the first sample, okay? If you want the entire list, of course, to be exported, that's what you would do. And we're gonna click batch run right here. I'm gonna ignore that window, just say yes. And then these are all going to come out with the same gating position. This should only take a few moments. So the iteration progress says 1 of 2 actions executed. That means the 2 actions are PowerPoint and Excel. And then the bottom progress bar is referring to how many different iterations we have. So we have, in our case, 1 file per iteration, or 9 FCS files. So we're going to have 9 iterations coming out. All right, so that should be done in a second. Okay, so here's our PowerPoint, and we like to say in FCS Express that what you see is what you get. So you can see that this looks exactly like my layout, right? It's like a one-to-one correspondence. I can zoom in and show you. So we have a total of 9 slides here shown on the left, because we had 9 files or 9 iterations in our data list. And these are all easy to move around and resize. They come out at a very high resolution, and yet the file size is still manageably small. So you can move these around. I did see a question how to save individual plots as figures. There is a way to do that, and you know, just to answer your question, the way to do that is right-click, save selection as picture. But what's even easier to do, if you wanted to just take a picture of a plot and put it into PowerPoint because you're making a poster, or you know, some other image editing program, it's even easier just to right-click and do copy, or a Command-C or Control-C, i.e. use the clipboard, and then come into PowerPoint and just do a Control-V or a Command-V to paste. That's so much easier than exporting images, okay? But you can do it, but it works seamlessly with the clipboard like that, okay? So these are all looking exactly like your layout, correct? Okay, so let's take a look at, I do see a question, how do you make the histogram of all samples on one page? So I will just show you where that is. I'm not going to actually do it, but I just want to get you pointed in the right direction. That would be when you're setting up your PowerPoint, you would go here to mode and do something like a custom grid. And then you click on the little ellipsis and you could say, this is defaulting to 4x4. So this would be having four iterations by 4 iterations per page, okay? So like you could maybe just set up a page with just the histograms and just batch that page. And if you had 16 samples, they would all fit on one PowerPoint slide, okay? So our manual goes into way more depth about that. So definitely, you know, check that out and write to us if you can't find it, but I'm gonna show you how to access our help resources towards the end of this. Okay, so, oh, right. I'm sorry, I lost my place. So let's take a look at the Excel. That should have opened automatically too. Oh, it didn't. Okay, sorry. That's all right. I will find that on my desktop. Okay, so here we have a very familiar looking format, right? So we have one row per file. We have the 9 files, and then you have one column for every statistic that you chose to export. Okay, so that's going to look pretty familiar, right? No matter what software you're used to using. Okay, so let me get back to one person's question that I saw in the chat window, which was how do you deal with the situation where you need to adjust your gates individually for each sample, right? Because like let's try to find one where maybe it doesn't fit as well. I'm sure I can find one. Like maybe the B cells gate here needs to be nudged a little left. This one, the T cells gate is not really it's not enclosing the whole population, right? So let's see how we deal with that. It's not difficult. I would say that the easiest way to do it is by adding a pause in your batch options. And so let me show you where that is. So if you go to batch options and you check this box right here, unconditionally pause between iterations, what that will do is it would, so if I checked it like that, it would, rather than exporting all 9 files one by one, it would stop on each file and give you a chance to make an adjustment just for that file. So remember the progress bars that I showed you when it was generating the PowerPoints and the PDFs, it wouldn't just go automatically through all 9. It would stop, you know, 9 times and give you a chance to adjust it on a sample by sample basis, okay? And so then you would just, you know, check that box and click batch run just like we did. So that's one way to do it. I personally love to do it that way. But let me show you another way to do it because I feel like a lot of users, what they like to do is save the, I'm sorry, what they like to do is set up the gating positions individually for each sample before they run the batch. So we can do it that way in FCS Express too, okay? And that's using snapshots. So if you go to the Tools menu, you'll see this button called Apply Iteration Snapshot. And snapshot is just the term that FCS Express gives to the individual gating positions that are saved on a per sample basis. So you would just click this button so it's on. And then once you click it, it's always going to be on for that layout as long as you remember to save it. If you later reopen the layout on another day, this button will still be on, so don't worry about that. And then you're just going to go through your samples and adjust your gates, okay? So let's say, okay, I'm happy with this. This is my first sample. Let me go to my second sample. You know, maybe I want to move this LIMS gate a little bit to the left like that. Okay. And maybe I want to go to the next sample and, you know, maybe this T cells gate, I'll make it a little tighter, and the B cells gate, let's say I'll make it a little bigger, something like that. Let's go to the 4th sample, and I'm just going to make a really obvious change, although it doesn't really fit the population. I just want the change to be obvious when I regenerate the PDF, okay? So just for illustration purposes, I'm going to make this T cells gate very huge, okay? So because we now have this Apply Iteration Snapshot button on, we turned it on before we made the gate changes, I can go forward and backwards through my entire list of samples, and you see that FCS Express is remembering the gating positions, the individual gating positions that I set for every sample, right? You see the gates jumping around, right? It's most obvious if you look at this one where I made the the T cell red gate very large, okay? And then I go to the next sample, it goes back to its smaller size, right? So that's all going to be saved, even if you close and reopen the layout on another day. And now we can run the batch, and those changes will be recorded in the batch exports as well. So the important thing to know is if you've set up these snapshots individually for this layout, you want to do rerun, okay? So if I click batch run, I'm going to get this warning message saying their iteration snapshots already saved. Running the batch process will clear these snapshots. Are you sure you want to continue? I'm going to say no, because I actually want to use those snapshots, right? I want them to come out with the different positions in the PowerPoint and the Excel. So instead of run, I'm going to click rerun. And rerun is essentially run with snapshots, okay? It's going to run the batch process while using the snapshots we created. So I'm just going to let that go. While it's going, I'll answer one question that Karen had in the chat window. She's asking, what is the difference between snapshot and data-specific gate? That's a great question. You can use them. You can use data-specific gates if you want to during a batch. They will work just fine during a batch. The reason why we have two different functions, though, is because data-specific gates was created like if you were not doing a batch and you just had the separate data files simultaneously showing in multiple plots on your layout. Like, let's say you were doing, for example, a titration, and you needed all those serial dilutions simultaneously showing up in your layout, as opposed to a batch process. The data-specific gate allows you to have the different gating positions in that case, okay, outside of the batch, just in the live layout, if that makes sense. Okay, hopefully that's not too confusing. You can write to us if you'd like more clarification, but the important point is you can use your data-specific gates during a batch. So if that's what you're comfortable doing, keep doing it. You don't have to use snapshots if you don't want to. Okay, so whoops, I shouldn't have minimized that. Let's get back to the PowerPoint. So here's our PowerPoint, and let me zoom in, and I just want to prove to you that those gating positions came through. So this is our first sample with the default gating position. Let's go to our second sample. You see I made that blue glimpse gate a little tighter. Here's the third sample, and here's the fourth sample where it's most obvious. See, I made that T-cell lymph gate on the plot in the upper right. Much bigger, right? And I go to my fifth sample and everything jumped back to the original position that it had the last time that we looked at that sample, right? Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So let's hop back to our outline for a second. Oops, let's get PowerPoint out of the way. Okay, so we ran a batch process. That's great. So now let me show you the last step in these last few minutes we have. And that is how to reuse our layout as a template. Because remember, we're all about saving time in FCS Express, right? So although it's fun to analyze, it's not fun to reanalyze, right? So let's just use the same layout again. And I'll show you that basically in less than 30 seconds, you would be done with your work if you had acquired the same experiment and just needed to reanalyze it the same way. Okay, so let's go to our layout. So, okay, let's just do a save. I'm going to show you the easiest way to do this. I mean, there's a couple different ways. Well, you know what? It's fine. Let me just show you how to save this actually as an empty template, okay? So like, let's say you plan on doing this experiment at least 2 or 3 times, maybe even more. So we're going to save this as an empty template so that when we open it, we can just load in our data files from that week. Okay, so we're going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to call it Template. Give it another name, of course. You don't want to overwrite the layout that is linked to the files you just analyzed. You just want to create a separate copy of it that's an empty template. So it's important to give it another name, you know, call it template, if you will. And you want to select here, save as type unlinked. Okay, if you're on a PC, you'll get the same menu. I think it'll just be in the lower right corner of the dialog window, but it's the same thing. So you'll do unlinked, that's like an empty template, and say save. Okay, so now we want to close and reopen it to get it to come up. All right, there we are. All right, so here's our empty template. You see all the plots, even the statistics table is there waiting for data. Here's our data list. Remember, if you didn't have your data list open, you can get it here on the data tab, no biggie. So let's load in our files. Remember I said you can use the blue plus to load in the files. You know, I think some of you prefer to drag and drop from your file browsing Mac Finder or your Windows Explorer window, so I'll do it that way. Okay, so let's say that this is a new group of files that I want to analyze. It doesn't even have to be the same number of files. We had 9 last time. This time, let's say that I just had 5. I'm going to grab all these in, just drag and drop it in there. Okay, and now we can just double click on the first file. And we're going to do, I know I have histogram overlays here, so I'm going to just change all overlays on all objects, i.e. all plots, to the selected file. Okay, so I'll say okay. And now go next, previous, you see, I'm done, right? How long did that take? Less than 30 seconds, right? Can you imagine how long it would take if you started over from the beginning every time you repeated this experiment? That would not be very efficient, right? So the only thing I want to note is, you know, you could just do batch run, but then you'll end up overwriting your previous PowerPoint and Excel files. So let me show you where you can change the file name. So just double click on those actions and scroll down. The easy way is, you know, just give it a new name here in the text field. If you want to be really fancy, you can click on T for token and do keyword, and then you can go to keyword again, and then you can put in a unique keyword from your data files. So all of your data files have this $date keyword that's automatically added by your cytometer, and so that way, you know, your file name for this PowerPoint would be webinar3 _ whatever the date was. So let's see what it actually was, 27 March 2008. These are old files. But the idea there is like every time you acquire new files, it's going to have a unique date. And that way you cannot overwrite your previous PowerPoint, okay? You can use any keyword you want, but date is kind of a quick and dirty one. If you want to be extra special careful, you can check this box, ask for confirmation before overwriting an existing file. And if you save the template with that box checked, you know, at the very least, even if you didn't remember to retitle your PowerPoint and your Excel files, or you didn't put in this handy keyword, FCS Express would still ask you, are you sure you want to overwrite this file? Okay, so there's a lot of safeguards there, a lot of ways to automate your work. I see some questions about compensation. Thank you for the suggestion. We do have some recorded webinars on compensation online, but we'll think about adding that for the next month or so. So just wanted to address it because I saw 3 or 4 questions along those lines because we didn't have time to cover that today. But FCS Express does pull in your compensation from acquisition by default, so there's nothing special you'll have to do there. But yeah, that's basically all I wanted to show you today. In the last couple of minutes, I want to point you to our help resources. So I'd say the easiest thing to do is click on Help and Manual here from the startup screen. And I believe this is going to open up in a browser. Just give me a minute. Okay, sorry. If you're on a Mac, it's going to open up a PDF. That's okay. But you can also just go to File, Help, Tutorials. I believe this will open up in my browser. Yep, that's coming open. And I'm sorry, my internet's a little bit slower than usual today. Okay, so here you could start to type in whatever topic you wanted to look for. Okay, so like let's say you forgot something about batch processing. You can just write batch process, and then you'll have several help topics coming up. There are tutorials down here as well. So definitely check that out if you can't really remember what it is you needed to do. The other thing you can do is write to us at support. So If you click on this little support square here on the startup screen, that should take you to our support page. Let's give that just a second to open up as well. Okay. So, if you click on this, you can email us, or you can just email us directly from your inbox. Let me type out what that address is. So our support is, I would say, the finest in the world. And your response is guaranteed within 24 hours. It's usually much sooner. You'll usually get a response within a few hours, unless you email us outside of business hours. But we do have support agents on both coasts of the US, as well as the middle of the US, and also in Europe. So feel free to email us. And like I mentioned, we are happy to set up a screen share with you guys individually to kind of help you implement any of the things that we showed you today. Okay, and the last thing I want to point out actually is our video guide, because that's really, really useful for those of you who maybe don't have a lot of time, to read manual topics necessarily. If you click here on the video guide square on the startup screen, and this should open up. If you're on a PC, it'll actually open up in its own little window, and it'll be a bank of videos that are very topical, and they're not more than 3 minutes long. If you're on a Mac, it'll open up like this in a browser, and you can scroll down to this section here, short overviews. And whoops, let's erase that. Okay, and if you click on more videos, for example, there will be 3-minute videos here on every possible topic. So I think there's one on batch processing. Yep, that's the first one. Here's one on compensation that could get you started on that, because I didn't have time to cover that today. So it's a wide variety of topics. So please check that out when you have time. And I just want to thank you all so much for joining me. I hope that, whether you're a newbie to FCS Express or more seasoned, you still found some useful tips to work today. And I will archive this online. It'll probably take half a day or a day or so to render and put it on our YouTube channel and our website here, but please access it if you'd like to review it. And I'm going to stick around for a few minutes on the line here, so just feel free to type in any questions that you had that we didn't get to, and I'll try to answer them verbally while we're still here, okay? And I'm going to scroll through this backlog of questions, although I see my colleague Raphael did a great job getting to most of them.